Okay, so if Melee is Marvel, then Multiversus is Street Fighter. Let me explain. You'll often hear players complain or applaud the pace of a game, or use the game's speed to justify why they may or may not like a game. But what does this really mean, and what are the implications of a fast versus a slow game? Let's take a look at Street Fighter. Street Fighter is often regarded as the slow, grounded-based footsies game. Most all of the options that people have in terms of approaching are intentionally designed to be reactable. Jumps and dashes are really the only universal ways to skip neutral in this game. Jumps and dashes in this game are great ways to keep your opponent on their toes and take your turn, but they are also very easily answered if your opponent is specifically looking for these options. This leads to neutral being more about spacing, pressure, and whiff punishing. You're constantly looking to make sure you stay at a specific range and press your buttons at a specific timing to make sure they hit, but you're also trying to avoid your opponent's buttons as necessary. This tango of spacing can look slow and boring to an outside perspective, sure, but the two players are constantly trying to get a read on exactly how the opponent is walking back and forth so that they can make sure they hit them when they walk forward. And they make sure to make their own movement patterns vague enough so that they can always be able to dodge the opponent's attack and strike back. Now, don't get me wrong, Street Fighter is not this simple. Sure, this is the fundamental idea, but there's a lot more that you have to keep track of. For one, long-range moves that force your opponent to block low can catch people trying to walk back if they've gotten too close. Blocking low, though, also prevents you from moving backwards and doesn't allow you to space yourself properly, so you're incentivized to stay out of your opponent's range in the first place. But you also can't endlessly walk back to stay out of range and whiff punish everything. This is because you'll eventually put yourself into the corner where you no longer have the ability to walk back to adjust your movement. And if you focus too much on timing your attacks to hit people's forward walk, you could either guess wrong and get whiff punished, or worse, they jump in right as you swing and get an even bigger combo that you would have gotten from landing your poke. This isn't even considering fireballs, invincible moves, armored moves, command grabs, overheads, and okay, this game is very complex, and you said this is the slow one? What could a fast game possibly be like? One day, a future game dev was playing Street Fighter, and he noticed there was a lot of limitations. Even outside the movement limitations that we've discussed already, since this was back when combos were considered a glitch, and people would mug you in the back alley if you threw them too many times. So the devs sought out to create a juiced up version of Street Fighter where every character felt broken in their own right. This game series went on to become Marvel vs. Capcom. Just looking at this footage in comparison to the Street Fighter footage, I'm pretty sure you can tell pretty intuitively that this game be faster than that game. Just looking at the movement, going full screen to in someone's face goes from a war of attrition to a blink and you'll miss it kind of situation. In addition to every character being designed to make you feel like you're playing the classic Street Fighter you knew and loved, but on crack, you also get to choose more than one character. This was done for a variety of reasons, but one of the most prominent was to ensure that no matter how insane they made the characters, you'd never be dead in just one interaction. But with the ability to choose multiple characters came the ability to call in assists. Assists allow the player to be fully actionable while the assist throws out hitboxes of some kind. This means there's a lot more mix in this game that heavily favors the aggressor due to their ability to cover their approach. And then after their approach is covered, the movement is so crazy in this game that you no longer just have to worry about blocking high or low. No, now you have to guess left, right, and high-low. With all of those factors combined, all of a sudden, all of those skills we talked about before suddenly become irrelevant. It becomes less about the little micro movements and spacing traps and more about how your opponent is controlling the screen. While defense in Street Fighter favors the defender typically, only really being able to be opened by a few select options, defense in Marvel favors the aggressor due to the countless options they have at their disposal. While this might seem obvious due to the factors I already talked about, this drastically affects the skills that are valued. Because the defender is the one in the bad position, it's less about the aggressor considering what option they can use to open up their opponents with, and more about the defender praying they know which option out of a million the opponent is going for. The speed in which characters can move around the screen and press buttons makes it impossible, or at least near impossible, to react to a lot of the options your opponent chooses to approach with. This, combined with the fact that the aggressor is the one in control, with a large variety of mix-ups and safety provided by assist, create a mentality of press buttons first, ask questions later.
That's not to say that the questions you ask later aren't interesting or that there's not still a skill in being the one who gets that first hit, but it provides a different list of priorities in contrast to a game where your approaches and pressure are reactable.
In Street Fighter, if the defender gets opened up, the aggressor is rewarded with a little extra damage and are allowed to continue pressing their advantage. In Marvel though, if the defender guesses wrong, there's a good chance they're dead.
Let's go gambling! Aw, dang it! 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 Aw, dang it!
This type of gameplay can feel very rewarding once you've learned all the mechs to look out for and learn when and where you can take your turn back. This makes good defensive gameplay really impressive at high level, but at the same time, it can be a little bit annoying for players to get into since it's going to take a lot longer to learn all the ins and outs of the characters and just how to defend yourself against the plethora of setups in the game. For me personally, Marvel is a great spectator sport because of this, but I can't bring myself to dedicate the time into the game due to just how steep the learning curve can be. The vast majority of play at low to mid levels is just players doing their strong setups or buttons, and whoever lands it first is usually the one who ends up on top. Without dedicating a ton of time into the game in the first place, it's very difficult to feel like you're beating the opponent through reads and outplays. And it feels much more like you're checking to see if they've done their homework on your character and assists. I feel the need to reiterate that this does not make it a bad game by any means, just different in the skills that it values. But for me personally, I just like the feeling of a large knowledge check being required before you can actually start enjoying what I personally value in a fighting game. But how does any of this relate to Melee or Multiversus? Aren't those just party platformer games? Much like Marvel, Melee's goal and design was to be a fast-paced, action-packed fighter with a ton of depth behind it. This game is so deep that there's still an insanely dedicated community behind it, despite the company who made it actively trying to shut it down and force people to forget about it. Even at my Smash Ultimate locals and statewide tournaments, you can still find a group huddled around a CRT playing Melee. And for good reason too. When you cook in this game, it feels amazing. I don't even play any of the crazy top tier characters, and even with my silly mid tier monkey, I can confidently say that there's no feeling quite like cooking someone with a touch of death combo in this game. The advantage state is so crazy strong in this game that Melee has to be played on 4 lives in a bracket match. That's even one more than Marvel 3, and that game is infamous for just how quickly people can get deleted. So obviously, the game's movement is fast, like Marvel, and the game's time to kill is similar if not crazier than Marvel's, but they don't have assists, so surely it can't be as much of a knowledge check as Marvel, right? Lamau, did you really think a game played competitively for 23 years with no patches wouldn't have knowledge checks? Get the fuck out of here. Alright. Approaches by themselves aren't as knowledge checky as Marvel. Most of the time. But there's still quite a lot of prominent issues with low to mid level, specifically regarding handling pressure. While there is a ton of examples we could run through, let's take a look at the game's most prominent character in the meta, Fox. Specifically, the B&B approach of Drill Shine. There is a lot of steps to account for in just this simple approach, so buckle in. You can stuff it out if you have the range, sure, but whiff punishing is very difficult due to Shine's frame 1 activation and down air's only 9 frames of landing lag. But assuming you decide to block the down air though, after he does down air, you're gonna have to guess what he's going to do afterwards. Either he'll grab, expecting you to hold shield to wait out the Shine, or he'll just let Shine rip, knowing that it's impossible or near frame perfect for most of the cast to actually punish him if he decides to Shine. Then, assuming he does do the Shine afterwards, the defender then has to guess whether he'll go for a jump cancel grab and attempt to spot dodge him or grab him first if he can time it perfectly. Or he could just jump to call out this spot dodge / grab attempt and then whiff punish your attempt to grab him on landing. Or if you try to call this out, he could just wave dash back after the Shine to make it even safer and requiring a much riskier call out attempt to answer. Or if he's feeling extra spicy, he could Shine again and not grab, or wave dash to cross up your shield and Shine again. This isn't even considering the fact that if he calls out your movement, he can start this sequence by crossing up your shield and leaving even less options for most characters. Or the fact that he could opt to use Nair instead of Drill to make it even harder to effectively whiff punish in the first place. All of these are just for one approach option, just one Drill Shine, and if you don't know how to answer any of these options, there's a good chance that despite knowing exactly what your opponent is going to approach with, you're probably still going to guess wrong at one of the steps along the way or fumble the execution until you put a lot of time into the game. It's an amazing game once you've learned all the intricacies and have a solid game plan to answer these options. But I'm sure many people can relate with loving watching all the greats go ham on this game, but not playing it themselves. And this is due to the investment being required to even start playing the mind game with people. Low to mid-level locals are filled to the brim with your Fox and Falcos that have learned some very oppressive neutral options but lack fundamental game plan structure and the ability to adapt because it's just not rewarding at their level of play. Aggression and oppression is king in low-level Melee, and for some, this can be a very entertaining way to spend your time. But for others, it's a tough sell for what they truly value in a fighting game. And finally, we've arrived at Multiversus. Multiversus was interesting in its beta, especially for ones. It had a lot of the same insanely fast movement that Melee and Marvel did, but the hit stun and advantage state was kinda shoddy. There just wasn't a lot of hit stun, and dodges were very low commitment, so advantage state was difficult for all but a few select characters. A big part of the game's issues was that despite the game's speed, defense and how punishable moves were made it so that most characters, not you, struggled to convert reads and outplaying opponents into anything meaningful. But at the same time, due to the in-lag of moves being so low and the movement being so fast, even if you knew someone was running at you, there was pretty much no way of answering it on reaction. This made the game feel fast, but also unrewarding, so it ended up feeling slow, tedious, and honestly really annoying. While there was a dedicated community of players who did find enjoyment in this mix of styles, the majority consensus was that outplaying your opponents didn't feel very rewarding with dodge spam, and low lag aerials made it a coin toss when it came to who would hit who. Because of this, the larger community disregarded ones and preferred to treat it like it didn't exist and focused on twos where the team play and screen control weren't really affected by the dodgy nature of the game. But we're not here to talk about the beta. I've already covered that quite a bit in previous videos. No, we're here to discuss the recent Twitter war of a discussion that is the full release speed. In contrast to the beta, the game's movement has slowed down a ton, but the time to kill has also decreased. You may be scratching your head after everything I said about how increasing speed usually increases the time to kill, but let me explain. So for the full game, they pretty much reworked everything. They made characters slower, but made the reward that you got from hitting people much more impactful. This change made the game much more like Street Fighter.
Unlike the fast-paced approaches and screen control present in Melee and Marvel, Multiversus' full release keeps characters slow and therefore approaches reactable. Sure, burst options still exist, such as dodge jump aerials and the newly added dash attacks, but they're few and far between. Even then, the burst options that most characters have are designed with commitment in mind, whether that be the valuable resource of the dodge meter, or by requiring a player to commit to a move with high amounts of in-lag. It's these limited options and the mind games around how players use them that cause Multiversus to line up more closely with a game like Street Fighter than Marvel. The gameplay, for that very reason, is focused around properly spacing yourself, whip punishing, and occasionally keeping your opponents on their toes with your burst options, further pushing Multiversus in the direction of Street Fighter. Even though Multiversus can have a devastating advantage state, like Street Fighter, the defender is typically the one with the advantage. This is because of the parry system allowing the defender to turn any bad situation into a favorable one at almost any time. In order to take advantage of Multiversus' insane advantage state, a player would typically need to make back-to-back hard reads to really explode their opponent. Having stage control ends up being a much safer and consistent way of racking up damage and closing stocks. This makes Multiversus stage control much different than a game like Melee's, where players have access to partially or fully invincible moves when cornered, and more akin to the corner in Street Fighter, where you also aim to slowly but surely chip at your opponent's health bar.
To some, this makes the game boring, and it will cause it to stale out for them after a little while. But to others, this is why they play fighting games. However, it's also important to mention that any kind of change to pre-established values in a game will always be met with controversy. When you really enjoy a fighting game, and the system that previously rewarded your style of play is suddenly changed to punish your style of play and reward other styles, players can't help but to feel betrayed. Even if there is an entirely new generation of players that love the new system, the players that have been hurt by the changes will always vent the loudest. Looking back at Street Fighter, the installation's latest mechanic, Drive Rush, has been met with roaring applause by many new players, but heavily criticized by veterans. The addition of Drive Rush makes the game substantially faster and adds even more mental load on players who prefer the slower, grounded pace of the game. My goal with this argument in regards to Multiversus is to showcase that any change made to a game's speed can be met with critique, since changes to the game speed will inherently change what skills are rewarded and what habits are punished. And while there are still plenty of people who enjoyed the pace of the old Multiversus beta, it was clear in the numbers that even when the game was online and still getting updates, the larger mass of people were quickly losing interest. A lot of criticism at the time of writing is in regard of just how slow the game is. And while I personally do think that certain aspects of the speed can be adjusted without worrying about balance being thrown out the window, such as hit stop on certain moves, a faster game does not equate to a better game. And as a community, we need to be careful what we wish for, as at the end of the day, someone's getting hurt. And while you don't hear as much on Twitter from the players who like it right now, if Player First doesn't handle their projected increase in speed carefully, you'll definitely be hearing from them later. It's been a while since my last video essay, but I do plan to keep doing these monthly while still juggling stream and competition. I don't have an exact date per month or anything like that set, so just be sure to subscribe so you don't miss my next one. I wanted to make sure I played the new version enough to actually have an updated and informed discussion on the matter. It's a controversial take, but I actually really like the new Speed. Sure, it felt weird at first after spending so much time with the old multiverses, but for me personally, I value the skills on display much more than I did in the previous iteration. I think that a small speed adjustment is warranted, and the hit stop can definitely make the game look slower to observers, but I'm a really big fan of the direction they've taken from the beta to the full release. But that's everything I have to say for now, so yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video.